12 secret Canadian towns the government doesn't advertise. You probably think of Canada as endless prairies, the Rocky Mountains, or maybe the gleaming towers of Toronto and Vancouver. But there's a hidden Canada side most people never see. A Canada of shuttered railroad stations, boarded-up storefronts standing alone on frozen prairie, coal mines swallowed by dense boreal forest, and entire communities that thrived for decades and then simply vanished. In this video, we are counting down 12 secret Canadian townsplaces where optimism once flourished, where families built lives, where wealth flowed and industries hummed. We're talking about a railroad junction that became a ghost in less than a generation. A Yukon gold rush town that's now nothing but weathered logs and permafrost. A prairie boom town where the wind is the only resident. So stay with me to the end, because number 1 is a place so forgotten that even most Canadians don't know it existed. So hit subscribe and let's begin. Number 12, Eldon, Alberta. Drive west from Calgary along Highway 22, and you eventually pass through rolling ranch country, where the Rocky Mountains begin their rise on the horizon. There's a turnoff that leads to a quiet road lined with spruce and aspen. If you stop and listen, you hear mostly wind, the constant pushy Alberta wind that moves across the plains and never quite stops. Hidden among the trees and the overgrown foundations is Eldon, a place where a handful of century-old structures still stand, tilted now, weathered to the color of old bone. Eldon was born in 1911 when a coal seam was discovered beneath the foothills. A company built a mining operation, then housing for the miners, a town site with a general store, a school, a church, and a boarding house. By 1920, 300 people called Eldon home. Miners came from Britain, Eastern Europe, and the American coal fields. Families moved here for steady work and the promise of a future. The coal cars rumbled through daily, bound for Calgary and the growing cities to the east. The town had a band, a hockey team, a community. The postmaster knew everyone's name. Then the market shifted. Oil and gas became cheaper and more abundant than coal. The seams ran shallow. By the 1930s, the mine was struggling. The Depression finished what economics had started. Families packed their belongings and left. Some stayed as long as they could, watching their town contract year by year. Today, if you walk the old town site, you find scattered brick foundations, a few weathered log structures, and the constant whisper of the wind through the spruce. The school is gone, the church is gone, the boarding house has collapsed. The coal tipple is nothing but rusted metal and memory. A historical marker tells the story in 30 words. Elk move through where children once played. In the quiet, you can almost hear the echo of the mining bell that once called men to the seams. Number 11, Gold Panner, British Columbia. In the southern interior of British Columbia, where the Similkameen River cuts through semi-arid grassland and ponderosa pine, there is a highway turnoff that leads to a dead-end valley. The road narrows. The land becomes quieter. You might pass a single gravel driveway. An old fence line, traces of an orchard, fruit trees gone wild, still bearing apples in September, growing in the shape their pruning once gave them decades ago. Gold Panner was born during the gold rush of the 1890s, not the famous Klondike Stampede, but one of the smaller rushes that swept through British Columbia like fever. Miners came looking for nuggets and dust in the Similkameen and its tributaries. A man named John could file a claim, build a cabin, and live off what the creek provided. But the town that developed was more stable. A roadhouse, a trading post, a few permanent structures. By 1910, it had become a supply hub for prospectors and a stopping point for freight wagons heading higher into the mountains. People stayed and built lives. Orchards were planted. Apples did well in the dry climate, but the accessible gold ran out. The big operations moved to new creeks further north. Young people left for the coastal cities or the Alberta prairies. The orchards required constant work, and eventually, the work stopped paying. By the 1970s, fewer than 20 people remained. By the 1990s, it was just a name on old maps. Today, Gold Panner is nearly invisible. The roadhouse foundation is barely visible under decades of needle fall and moss. The old trading post is a weathered shell. The orchards persist in their wild state, a ghost garden of untended apple trees, sometimes still bearing fruit, standing in a valley that remembers them but no longer tends them. The Similkameen flows on, still carrying gold, still worth nothing to anyone. If you visit, You might see deer moving between the trees or hear the sudden crash of a falling branch. Otherwise, there is only the sound of water and wind and the slow work of forest reclaiming what humans once cleared. Number 10. Fort O'Brien, Ontario. On the northwestern shore of Lake Superior, where the boreal forest meets granite cliffs and cold, dark water, there is a narrow point of land that juts into the lake. Dense spruce grows almost to the water's edge. The wind comes hard off the water, carrying the smell of pine and ancient stone. Hidden here, nearly invisible from the water and inaccessible except by hiking through brush, is Fort O'Brien, what remains of it. This was a Hudson's Bay Company trading post, established in 1847. For over a century, it was a hub of the fur trade trappers, and traders would gather here to exchange beaver, marten, and fox pelts for supplies, ammunition, and trade goods. The fort was small but vital, a gathering place in the deep wilderness where business was conducted and stories were exchanged. Men who knew every creek and portage in the north would winter here. The post had a store, a warehouse, a blacksmith, and quarters for the traders. It was one of thousands of such posts, but this one was particularly remote, even by the standards of the fur trade. The fur trade declined gradually through the late 1800s. Beaver populations depleted. Fashion changed. By 1900, the Hudson's Bay Company was consolidating operations, closing smaller posts. Fort O'Brien was abandoned. The building slowly surrendered to the forest. Snow and ice, rain and wind, frost heaves and root growth. The boreal forest is patient and relentless. If you hike to Fort O'Brien today, you find almost nothing. A few foundation stones, barely distinguishable from the rocky ground. Perhaps a rotted beam or two. The forest has overgrown it completely. No sign marks the spot. No plaque commemorates the decades of commerce that happened here. The lake still laps at the shore. The wind still moves through the spruce. It is a place where history has been so thoroughly erased that you would need to know it was here to find it. And even then, you might walk past and never know. Number 9. Rossland, British Columbia. In the boundary country of south-central British Columbia, where the mountains fold in on themselves and the valleys are tight and forested, the town of Rossland sits on the slope of Red Mountain. Today it has a second life as a ski destination, but that's not the story of Rossland's secret. The real story is buried deeper in the mountains themselves. Rossland was born in 1890 when gold was discovered in the Red Mountain. Unlike the placer mining of previous generations, this was hard rock mining deep shafts sunk into the mountain, thousands of men working by candlelight hundreds of feet underground. By 1900, Rossland was one of the richest gold camps in all of North America. The War Eagle Mine, the Leroy, the Center Star Thieves were producing hundreds of thousands of dollars in gold annually. The town boomed. 20,000 people lived here at its peak. There were saloons, hotels, theaters, a rail line connecting it to the smelters and trail. Money flowed. Young men came from everywhere, from Cornwall and Wales, the mining tradition, from Bohemia, from the American mining camps, from eastern Canada. Fortunes were made. The town was young and roaring, but deep mines are dangerous, and the geology was complex. By the 1920s, the easy ore had been extracted. Mining deeper became less profitable. The Great Depression cut demand for everything. One by one, the big mines closed. The last significant mine shut down in the 1930s. The population collapsed from 20,000 to a few hundred. For decades, Rossland slept. The old storefronts on Columbia Avenue stood empty. The Grand Hotel hosted no guests. The theaters fell dark. The mines filled with water and silence. The headframes rusted. By the 1980s, there was talk of Rossland becoming a ghost town entirely. But then ski development began on Red Mountain, and a new economy was born. Today, the mountain draws thousands of skiers each winter, and Rossland has become a modern mountain town. But if you look carefully, you can still see the bones of the old gold rush town underneath. The names carved in stone, the width of the old main street built for the crowds of miners, the abandoned mining structures visible in the forest above town. Rossland is a place where two Canadians exist in the same location. The ghost of mining wealth and the contemporary resort town, and most visitors never realize they're walking through both at once. Number 8. Cardston, Alberta. On the eastern edge of the Rocky Mountains, in southern Alberta, not far from the American border, sits the town of Cardston. It still exists, technically, but it is a shadow of what it was. a place that thrived and then contracted, nearly disappeared, and never quite recovered. Cardston was founded in 1887 by American Mormon settlers seeking to build a community based on religious principle and agricultural possibility. The land was good for ranching and grain. The Mormon Church invested in infrastructure, irrigation canals, a sugar factory, mills. By the early 1900s, Cardston was a thriving agricultural center. Farmers brought grain and beets to be processed. The town had a railroad connection, schools, a hospital, multiple churches, and a strong sense of community identity. Population peaked around 1910 at nearly 3,000 people. Then came the Great Depression, and later the droughts of the 1930s. The sugar factory, which was the economic anchor, closed. The agricultural economy collapsed. Younger people left for the cities. By the 1950s, the population had halved. By the 1980s, Cardston had become a quiet town of under 3,000, then under 2,000. The railroad stopped coming. Businesses closed. The town hollowed out. Today, Cardston still exists, but it feels like a place where life has become optional. You can drive through Main Street and count the empty storefronts. The architecture is beautiful brick buildings from the 1900s, well maintained by the remaining residents, but emptiness is visible in the windows. Cardston is alive, but barely. It is a place that achieved its dream and then watched it slowly drain away, unable to stop it or fully explain why. Number 7. Alert Bay, British Columbia. On Cormorant Island, one of the northern islands off the coast of British Columbia, sits the village of Alert Bay. It is accessible only by ferry, a 40-minute crossing from Port McNeill on Vancouver Island. The village clings to the shoreline, hemmed in by dense, temperate rainforest. Alert Bay was built around the salmon industry. The waters off Cormorant Island were rich with fish. In the late 1800s, canneries were built, and the town grew to support them. At its peak, in the 1920s and 1930s, Alert Bay was a booming place. Cannery workers, fishermen, merchants, all crowded into the small space between forest and sea. There was money here. The salmon ran thick, and the canneries operated almost constantly during the season. The town had multiple hotels, theaters, shops, a hospital. But salmon stocks declined over the decades. Overfishing, habitat loss, and changing ocean conditions reduced the runs. By the 1960s and 1970s, the big canneries were closing. The fishing industry consolidated. Young people left for Vancouver or other coastal cities. The population contracted from a peak of nearly 2,000 to under 500 today. Walking through Alert Bay now, you move through a village haunted by its own prosperity. The old cannery buildings still stand, but are mostly unused. The Grand Hotel is now a small bed and breakfast struggling to fill rooms in the off-season. The streets are quiet. Houses are well maintained because the remaining residents care for them, but many are empty or occupied part-time. Alert Bay is a place that still breathes, but shallowly. It is sustained partly by tourism, partly by cultural preservation efforts among the Kwakwaka'waka'waka'wak First Nations people whose territory this is. But the economic foundation that built the town, the salmon, is gone, and the town knows it can never be what it was. Number 6. Uranium City, Saskatchewan. In the far north of Saskatchewan, on the shore of Lake Athabasca, there is a place that doesn't appear on most modern maps. Uranium City was founded in the 1950s during the post-war nuclear boom. Uranium had been discovered in the rocks and sediments around Lake Athabasca, and the Canadian government wanted it extracted. A company built a town from nothing in the remote northern bush. Houses, a school, shops, a hospital, a complete town for uranium miners and their families, built where there was nothing but forest and rock and water before. At its peak, around 1960, Uranium City had nearly 3,000 residents. Miners came from across Canada and beyond. There was good money in uranium mining. The town had all the amenities. Schools were built. Families chose to live here in this remote place because the work was steady and paid well. The town was modern, optimistic, forward-looking. The mines were productive. The future seemed certain. But uranium markets are volatile and tied to international events and policies. By the 1970s, as nuclear energy became politically controversial and uranium prices collapsed, the mines began to shut down. The first closure was like a puncture in a balloon, slow at first, then accelerating. By 1982, the last mine closed, the town was evacuated. The company couldn't sustain it anymore. Thousands of people had to leave. Homes were abandoned. Schools closed. Businesses shut. By the 1990s, Uranium City was almost completely empty. Today, fewer than 100 people remain in Uranium City. The houses stand empty, weathered by decades of northern weather. The school building remains, now used for storage or nothing at all. The cemetery is growing, tended by the few who stayed. The lake stretches out, beautiful and indifferent. Uranium City is a town frozen in time, a place built with absolute confidence in the future, then abandoned almost as suddenly as it was built. It is one of the most remote ghost towns in Canada, accessible only by boat or plane in winter, or by a long drive through logging roads in summer. Most Canadians don't know it exists. Those who stayed chose to remain in a place that the rest of the country had decided to forget. Number 5. Nisga'a, British Columbia. Deep in the valleys of northwestern British Columbia, where the mountains are steep and the forests are ancient and dense, there is a place called Nisga'a. It sits where the Nass River cuts through the coastal mountains, a landscape of waterfall-carved cliffs and old-growth cedar. The village is beautiful, or was. Today it is one of the most poignant abandoned towns in Canada. Nisga'a was built around coal mining in the early 1900s. A coal seam was discovered in the mountains, and a company began extracting it. Miners were brought in, Chinese workers primarily, along with others. A small town developed to support the mine. Houses were built, a school, a cemetery. By 1910, Nisga'a had perhaps 300 residents. The coal moved out by pack trail and eventually by railroad. Work was steady, the town was permanent, but coal markets shifted. Competition increased. By the 1920s, the mine was becoming economically marginal. By the 1930s, it had closed completely. The company abandoned the town. Most residents left immediately. A few stayed, hoping the mine might reopen. It never did. Today, Nisga'a is one of the most haunting abandoned sites in British Columbia. The structures remain largely intact. The buildings have not fully collapsed, preserved partly by the cool, dry climate and partly because the remoteness has protected them from scavenging. Walking through Nisga'a is like walking through a preserved moment. Houses still contain furniture. The school still has desks, remnants of everyday life scattered about. The wilderness is reclaiming everything, slowly roots. Push through wood. Trees grow inside buildings. Moss covers everything. There is no sign of human activity. The river flows past, indifferent and eternal. The mountains stand as they did 1,000 years before and will for 1,000 years after. Nisga'a requires a serious hike to reach. It is accessible only by foot or boat from the nearest road. Few people visit. Fewer still know it exists. The Nisga'a Nation, whose territory this is, protects the site and occasionally gives guided tours. But mostly Nisga'a is left alone, a place where human presence is being slowly erased, where buildings become sculptures of their former selves, where the forest wins. Number 4. Faro, Yukon. In the Yukon Territory, in the southern interior where the landscape transitions from boreal forest to subarctic grassland, there is a town that rose and fell twice. Faro was built around mining, first silver, lead, later copper. It was founded in 1969 when the Faro mine began operations. The mine was massive, one of the largest open-pit lead and zinc mines in the world. A town was built for miners and their families. At its peak, in the 1980s, Faro had nearly 2,000 residents. It was a successful, prosperous town with schools, shops, and community life. But mines don't last forever. The ore body of Faro was finite. Metal prices fluctuated. By 1992, the mine closed. The town nearly evaporated. Hundreds left. Businesses folded. It seemed like Faro would become another Yukon ghost town. But in 1994, the mine reopened. Hope returned. People came back. The town rebuilt. Faro thrived again. Schools reopened. Children were born and grew up in a community that had been given a second chance. Then, in 2002, the mine closed permanently. This time, the town truly died. The population collapsed to under 500. It has not recovered. Faro still exists physically. The houses are still there. The schools are still there. the lifeblood of the town is gone. It is a place that learned to hope again and then had that hope permanently extinguished. Faro is a Canadian tragedy, a town that died, came back to life, and died again. Number 3, Ballarat, Saskatchewan. On the northern prairie of Saskatchewan, where the landscape is vast and nearly treeless, where wind moves across grassland unobstructed, there is almost nothing to indicate that Ballarat ever existed. No town center remains. No buildings stand. Nothing marks the place, except perhaps a few foundation stones scattered in the grass, and a cemetery, always a cemetery. Ballarat was a homestead community established in the early 1900s during the Great Prairie Settlement. Farmers came here from Europe, from eastern Canada, from the American Midwest. They built lives on the flat prairie, plowing sod and planting grain. The land was difficult, the winters were brutal, the soil was hard, the distances were vast, but there was optimism. A railroad line was promised, a town site was platted, a school was built, a church was built, a general store was established. By 1910, Ballarat had maybe 200 residents spread across the surrounding farmland, with a small village center. But prairie farming is unforgiving. The Great Depression struck when crops were still young. The droughts of the 1930s killed the wheat. One after another, farmers abandoned their claims. By 1945, the school had closed. By 1960, the store was shuttered. By 1980, Ballarat had ceased to exist as anything but a name on historical documents. The buildings had been torn down or burned for fuel. The cemetery remained, as cemeteries do, a lonely rectangular plot of grass with weathered stones marking names that no one living remembers. Walking where Ballarat was, you feel the immensity of the prairie and the fragility of human settlement. The wind blows across empty grassland. A few gophers pop up and disappear. The sky is enormous. It is hard to imagine that families lived here, that children went to school here, that a community was built from nothing. The prairie is patient. It waits. It takes back what was taken from it. Ballarat is less a place now than a concept, an idea of what once was, dissolved into the grass and the wind. Number 2, El Dorado, Manitoba. In the boreal forest of northwestern Manitoba, hundreds of kilometers from any substantial town, there is a place called El Dorado. To reach it, you drive north from Thompson on a logging road, deep into the bush where the forest is dense and the distances are enormous. The road is rough. Cell service disappears. The human world recedes. Eventually, you reach El Dorado. El Dorado was built in the 1910s around a gold mining operation. A company discovered gold in the rock and established a mine. Buildings were constructed. A town site was laid out. Workers came. At its peak, maybe 400 people lived here, working the mine, running the support services, building the community. There was a town hall, a store, housing for the miners. There was the sense of permanence that gold creates. This is a real town. These are real people. This will last. But gold mining is boom and bust, and the bust came in the 1940s. The ore body was depleted. The market price fell. The mine closed. The company removed what machinery it could and walked away. Most residents left immediately. A few stayed, people who had made lives here, who had families, who couldn't imagine leaving. But the town was dead. The company didn't maintain it. The forest began the slow work of reclamation. Today, El Dorado is a haunting landscape of half-collapsed structures. The main building still stands, its windows broken, its interior a confusion of collapsed ceilings and fallen beams. The smaller buildings are in various states of decay. Trees grow through walls. Moss covers everything. It is neither town nor wilderness, but a strange in-between state human construction, arrested in its dissolution, not yet returned to forest, but no longer a human place. Walking through El Dorado, you hear the silence of the boreal forest, the sound of wind in spruce and pine, the occasional bird call, the sound of your own footsteps on soft ground. You see the remnants of human effort, a nail, a piece of machinery, a book rotting on the floor. You feel the weight of decades of abandonment. El Dorado is a place where time moved differently than in the rest of Canada. It was built with hope, abandoned in disappointment, and has been slowly returning to the forest ever since. Few Canadians know it exists. Fewer still have seen it. It is one of the country's most secret places. Number 1. Teller, Yukon. In the far north of the Yukon Territory, in the Goldfields region of the Klondike, there is a place called Teller. To reach it, you fly into Dawson City, first a small town in the Yukon that is itself a relic of the 1898 gold rush. From Dawson, you take a rough road north toward the old gold creeks. The landscape becomes more remote. The road becomes worse. Eventually, you reach a place where the road simply ends, and beyond that is nothing but tundra and forest and the vastness of the Yukon. Teller was born in 1898 during the Klondike Gold Rush, one of the last great gold rushes in North America. Gold had been discovered in the creeks around what is now Dawson, and 30,000 people stampeded north to make their fortune. Most came through the Chilkoot Pass in horrific conditions. Some succeeded. Most failed. But the rush created a sudden civilization in the Yukon wilderness. Teller was one of a dozen towns that sprang up to support the mining operations. It was a supply point, a stopping place, a center of commerce. At the peak of the rush, around 1900, Teller had several hundred residents. There were saloons, a general store, a roadhouse, stables, claim offices. Gold flowed, money was spent. The place was alive with the fever of possibility. But gold rushes are inherently temporary. The accessible gold ran out within a few years. By 1905, most creeks were producing only marginal returns. The miners moved on to other goldfields, Alaska, British Columbia, later Nome, Alaska. The easy fortunes had been made by a lucky few. Everyone else faced the hard reality that real mining was labor-intensive and unrewarding. By 1910, Teller was a village of maybe 100. By 1920, it was 50. By 1940, it was abandoned entirely. Today, Teller is one of the most remote and authentic ghost towns in North America. No road goes to it. You must hike the final miles or approach by river in summer. The buildings still stand, weathered to silver gray by Yukon weather. The saloon is there, with bottles still on the shelves. The roadhouse remains. The cemetery sits on a hill, its wooden markers tilted by frost heave and settling ground. Trees grow between buildings. Permafrost prevents full collapse, but also prevents repair. The gold rush created Teller in 5 years and abandoned it in 10. Over a century later, it remains exactly as it was left, a preserved moment of northern history, maintained by the cold and isolation, visited only by the most determined adventurers. If you stand in Teller on a quiet summer evening, with the land stretched out under the endless daylight, you can almost feel the presence of the men who came here looking for fortune. You can imagine the saloon full, the roadhouse busy, the excitement and the desperation. You can smell the wood smoke from the stoves, and then the moment passes and you're alone again in the Yukon wilderness, surrounded by buildings that no one has lived in for 80 years. Teller is the most secret of Canada's secret towns, a place that achieved a moment of significance and then was utterly abandoned, preserved by geology and isolation, known only to a handful of historians and adventurers. It is a perfect monument to the Canadian frontier myth. The rush, the dream, the sudden abandon, the return of the land. Teller is Canada's true ghost town, and it is utterly, completely forgotten. I hope you have enjoyed this video exploring Canada's hidden places. These towns tell the story of Canada's boom and bust cycles, the gold rushes and mining operations, the railroads and agricultural dreams, the industries that promised permanence and delivered only temporary life. They are places where hope was invested and then withdrawn, where communities were built and then abandoned, where the northern landscape and the boreal forest are slowly taking back what humans once cleared and claimed. Please make sure to share this video with anyone who loves Canadian history or hidden places, and please subscribe for more explorations of the forgotten corners of our country. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.